I grew up seeing scenes like this, and I still remember the way that hallway smelled coffee stone and a thin thread of fear. That morning in D.C., though it wasn't me on the ground, it was a black woman in a crisp white blouse walking into a federal building like she belonged there because she did. And the man blocking her path didn't know who he was dealing with. He was tall, square-jawed, the type who thinks a badge makes him king of the block. He stepped out of his car, slammed the door so hard it echoed down the hall, and said to her loud enough for everyone to hear, "Do you believe I can make you disappear?" That line hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Phones twitched in pockets, eyes darted. You could feel people deciding whether to look away or bear witness. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Just gripped a little leather notebook against her chest, her lips curving into a thin smile, half contempt, half restraint. It wasn't a smile to make him feel better. It was a warning, the kind of smile that says, "I've seen worse than you." He got louder, feeding off his own echo. His partner, a younger cop, laughed like it was a bar joke. The hallway's hum flattened into a hush. I remember a young guy in a blue shirt whispering, "Why do you talk to her like that?" His voice trembled, but it sliced the silence. That tiny crack in the wall of fear changed everything. The lieutenant stomped closer boots on stone like hammer blows until they were inches apart. He leaned in and growled, "Answer me." And she didn't. Her silence became the spark that burned his whole act down. You could see it, his jaw tightening, his face flushing. He was used to fear begging submission. Instead, she looked at him like he was the one out of place. Then came the moment that still makes my stomach twist. He barked, "Move again and you'll get shot." And she lowered her hands slowly and let the notebook drop to the floor. Phones rose in unison, this time not sneaky, but high-bold pointed at his face. The notebook hit the tile with a dry thud and slid under the light. Not a weapon, just a notebook. But the overreaction told everyone who he really was. She tilted her head, hair falling over her shoulder, and said softly, "You just declared yourself louder than the law." You could almost hear spines straighten when she said it. The young lawyer near the back whispered, "That's a verdict, not a protest." The crowd saw the hypocrisy minutes later. A well-dressed businessman walked past, and the lieutenant snapped to attention, nodded, even called him, "Sir," then spun back to bark at her like she was trash. She looked him in the eye and said, "You bow to the rich and trample the poor." Phones caught that too. By then the chant had started low at first, then rolling like thunder. "Let her go. Let her go." When he shoved her shoulder hard enough to knock the notebook again, something broke. Not in her, she stood straight as a column, but in us. People yelled, stepped forward, blocked his view with their cameras. The young lawyer Daniel called out, "You're exceeding your authority." The whole scene shifted. It was no longer a cop versus one woman. It was a cop versus a crowd. And then she reached into her coat, slow and deliberate, and placed a small metal badge on the security table. Light struck it, a cold silver streak. At first he laughed, called it a stunt. But his partner caught the lettering Director Federal Bureau of Investigation and froze. The phone zoomed in, the text went viral before he even finished his sneer. Silence swallowed the hall. You could feel people's hearts beating like a drum. Someone whispered, "No way." Another muttered, "She's the director." The lieutenant bent down, saw the lettering, and the smirk fell off his face. For the first time, he looked unsure. The security guard, hands trembling, lifted the phone and called the Federal Center. We all held our breath. Every ring felt like a century. And then the voice on the other end confirmed it, Director Amina Callahan. Just 4 words, but they cracked the air like a gavel. Cheers erupted, cameras flashed, people stomped their feet. The same man who'd roared, "I am the law," sat down like the air had been punched out of him. His hands shook, his mouth opened, but only stammered words came out. "I didn't know." Students started chanting, "Take his badge." The janitors stepped forward, one man, one woman, telling stories of years of being humiliated by him. Their words fell like stones into a lake, each ripple showing the long chain of cruelty that had led to this moment. And then the leaks hit. Phones dinged, screens glowed with old personnel files, deleted disciplinary records, emails naming the local politician who'd covered for him. Each new notification was another nail in the coffin. People read them aloud, furious, crying, laughing bitterly. It was like decades of silence poured out all at once. Through it all, Amina stood steady, notebook in one hand, badge in the other. She didn't need to shout. Her presence said everything. When the crowd outside the building picked up the chant, "Justice has a name," it spread like wildfire down the street. People left their cars, mothers brought their kids, old folks with canes joined in. American flags next to handmade cardboard signs. You could feel a shift bigger than one hallway, bigger than one case. Reporters arrived, cameras rolling. One young journalist called out, "Ma'am, what message do you want to send to the nation?" And she looked right into the lens and said, "Threats are no longer a legal weapon." The crowd roared. Someone near me whispered, "That's it. That's the line." It wasn't over. On giant LED screens, outside networks put George Floyd's face next to the lieutenant's trembling one. From Minneapolis to Washington, scrolled underneath. People gasped. Some cried. An older man lifted his cane and said, "History repeats, but this time it ends here." The chant, "It ends here," swelled until the pavement shook. The lieutenant stayed slumped in his chair, hands over his face, drowning in the noise he'd created. His young partner hung his head, sweat dripping off his jaw, realizing he'd chosen the wrong side of history. And she, the woman they'd tried to break, stood tall, quiet, steady, letting the cameras do the talking. I still see the moment the elder black woman stepped forward, her hair white, her cane tapping the floor. She took Amina's hand and said, "Thank you for making us feel we're no longer forgotten." And Amina nodded, a small gesture, but heavier than any speech. Two women, one young, one old, standing side by side became the image that burned into all of us. When I tell people this story now, I tell them about the chants, the badge, the files, but mostly about the silence. The silence before the crowd broke the silence, when the badge hit the table, the silence when the phone confirmed who she was. Because in that silence, the balance of power flipped. That day taught me that real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands there with a leather notebook and a badge and lets the truth rise up on its own. And when the truth finally comes out, no amount of screaming or threats can stuff it back down. So if you're watching this and you've ever been told you don't belong, or you've seen someone abused and stayed quiet because you were scared, ask yourself, what would you do if the whole hallway was watching? Would you pick up your phone? Would you speak? Drop your thoughts below about right and wrong, about bias, about power. Tell me if you've ever seen someone try to disappear another human being with threats or status. Because the more we share these stories, the harder it becomes for anyone to bury the truth again. Justice has a name, but it only lives if we speak it. I grew up seeing scenes like this, and I still remember the way that hallway smelled coffee stone and a thin thread of fear. That morning in DC, though it wasn't me on the ground, it was a black woman in a crisp white blouse walking into a federal building like she belonged there because she did. And the man blocking her path